Imagine standing in a pitch-black cave 30,000 years ago. Around you, the world is a brutal theater of apex predators, freezing winds, and sudden death. Your fellow hunters are huddled in the dark, and suddenly, a sound breaks the silence. It isn't a chimpanzee's screech or the guttural grunt of an ape. It is a structured, intentional sequence of complex sounds. A word. For millions of years, our ancestors navigated the earth in a state of relative vocal silence, communicating through basic signals, gestures, and emotional cries. But then something shattered. Somewhere in our deep evolutionary past, a single mutation occurred, or a desperate survival crisis forced a change, and the first true word was spoken. It was the most dangerous, revolutionary tool ever created. But how did we get here? For decades, scientists believed that human speech evolved slowly, like a gradual ramp over millions of years. But the physical evidence tells a completely different story. When archaeologists looked at the skeletal remains of our oldest ancestors, they find something deeply unsettling. If you went back 2 million years, our ancestors had the brains to build tools, the endurance to outrun horses, and the social structures to live in tribes. But if they tried to speak a single sentence like the ones you're hearing right now, they would literally choke. Their bodies physically wouldn't allow it. Before we unlock the terrifying mystery of how we broke this evolutionary barrier, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We plunge deep into forgotten human history every single week, and you won't want to miss our next investigation into the ancient world. If you love uncovering these lost prehistoric secrets, smash the like button right now and share this video with a friend who loves history. Let's build the ultimate tribe in the comments below. Tell me, what do you think the very first spoken human word actually was? The mystery begins with a tiny, fragile piece of bone, no larger than a coin. It's called the hyoid bone, a horseshoe-shaped structure in your throat that acts as the anchor for your tongue. In chimpanzees, this bone sits high up in the throat, allowing them to swallow food and breathe at the same time without suffocating. For millions of years, our hominid ancestors had this exact same throat architecture. The answer seemed obvious. Humans just needed bigger brains to learn how to talk. It wasn't that simple. In fact, the evidence didn't fit at all. As our ancestors' brains grew larger, their throat anatomy remained stubbornly primitive. This meant that early humans were trapped in a terrifying paradox. They were smart enough to plan complex hunts and recognize stars in the sky, but they were trapped in a prison of physical silence. If they tried to drop their larynx to make complex vowel sounds, they would risk choking to death on their own food. Evolution doesn't just hand out upgrades for free. Every shift comes with a lethal cost, and that's where things get strange. If changing our throats was a death sentence, why did nature take the risk? To understand that, we have to look at a massive shift in how our ancestors survived. 2 million years ago, the African forests were shrinking, replaced by wide-open, baking savannas. Our ancestors, known as Homo erectus, suddenly found themselves out in the open, surrounded by giant hyenas, saber-toothed cats, and massive predators that could outrun them in a heartbeat. They could no longer hide in the trees. This environment forced a dramatic consequence. Humans had to become team hunters. They had to track animals across vast distances, coordinate ambushes, and defend their kills from rival scavengers. To survive, cooperation wasn't just a choice, it was a literal life-or-death necessity. If a hunter couldn't signal to his partner that a predator was stalking them from the tall grass, the entire group would be wiped out. But this necessity ran directly into a physical wall. Up to this point, communication was entirely based on gestures and basic calls, much like modern chimpanzees. If you want to show a chimpanzee how to crack a nut, you have to show them in person. Hand gestures required direct line of sight. But out on the open savanna, where a single bush could hide a lethal ambush, looking away from the horizon to read a hand gesture could mean getting your throat ripped out. And that is where the true crisis of human evolution began. Our ancestors needed a way to transmit complex survival data without looking at each other and without moving their hands away from their stone weapons. They needed to communicate through the dark, through dense fog, and around physical obstacles. The answer seemed obvious: just use vocal calls. But as we know, their throats were still functionally locked. The evidence didn't fit the idea of a slow, peaceful transition. If speech took millions of years to slowly develop, we should see a gradual, smooth descent of the throat bones across the fossil record. But we don't. Instead, archaeology shows that for an incredibly long time, nothing changed. Then, suddenly, the human body underwent a radical, dangerous anatomical redesign. What catalyzed this sudden transformation? For a long time, researchers were completely baffled. If a dropped larynx meant a massive risk of choking to death, the evolutionary pressure to change it must have been immense. It couldn't just be about sharing casual stories around a fire. It had to be a tool so powerful that it outweighed the daily threat of suffocation. But then scientists discovered something unexpected. When they analyzed the skulls of Homo erectus, they realized that these early humans weren't just hunting, they were cooking. The control of fire changed everything. Cooking food meant that meat and tubers became incredibly soft and easy to digest. This had a massive survival impact. Because the food was cooked, humans no longer needed massive, powerful jaws or giant teeth to chew raw meat for hours a day. Over generations, our faces shrank, our jaws retreated, and our teeth grew smaller. But this physical shrinkage had an accidental, world-altering byproduct. As the jaw and mouth cavity grew smaller, it forced the tongue backwards, pushing it down into the throat. This created a brand new, empty acoustic chamber directly above the vocal cords. It was a complete biological accident. Humans didn't evolve a speech chamber because they wanted to talk. They got a speech chamber because they started cooking their dinner. But this created a new mystery. Just because you have a musical instrument doesn't mean you know how to play it. The anatomical hardware was suddenly in place, but the brain software was completely missing. Monkeys have vocal tracts that can theoretically produce some human-like sounds, but their brains lack the specific neural wiring to control those sounds with precision. So when did the software finally boot up? For a long time, anthropologists looked at Homo sapiens, our own species, as the inventors of speech, assuming it happened around 200,000 years ago. The answer seemed obvious. We are the ones with art, complex culture, and global domination. It must have been us. But then a shocking discovery in a remote cave in Israel turned the entire timeline upside down. Archaeologists digging in Kabara Cave unearthed a 60,000-year-old skeleton, but this wasn't a modern human, it was a Neanderthal. And resting perfectly preserved in its throat was a modern, human-like hyoid bone. This discovery completely shattered the scientific consensus. Neanderthals weren't the grunting, brainless brutes populating popular media for a century. They possessed the exact same physical equipment for speech that we do. Because Neanderthals and modern humans split from a common ancestor over 500,000 years ago, it meant the hardware for speech didn't start with us. It was invented by an older, extinct human ancestor, Homo heidelbergensis. Think about the staggering survival consequence of this realization. Over 500,000 years ago, an ancient human species was already walking the earth with the physical capacity to speak. They were building complex wooden spears, hunting massive elephants, and caring for their sick. But did they actually talk? And that's where things get strange. When geneticists mapped the Neanderthal genome, they made an even startling finding. They discovered that Neanderthals possessed the exact same variant of a crucial gene called FXP2 that modern humans have. FXP2 is often called the language gene because it controls the fine motor skills in the mouth and face required to form fast, complex words. This means the software and the hardware were both present 500,000 years ago. But if ancient humans had the ability to speak for hundreds of thousands of years, why did it take so long for human culture to truly explode? Why do we see a massive gap between the physical ability to speak and the sudden appearance of complex human societies, art, and advanced technology? The explanation that speech just suddenly appeared out of nowhere is incomplete. There was a missing link between making sounds and creating a language. To find it, we have to look at how the human brain processes information. Imagine an early human tracking an animal. Their brain has a folder for animals, a folder for tools, and a folder for social relationships. For a long time, these folders were completely isolated from each other. A hunter could look at a track and know it belonged to a deer. They could look at a rock and know it made a good scraper, but they couldn't connect the two concepts into a single abstract thought. But then an extraordinary environmental crisis hit. Around 70,000 years ago, the planet experienced a massive volcanic winter, plunging the Earth into a severe ice age. The human population plummeted, pushing our species to the absolute brink of total extinction. Some estimates suggest there were fewer than 10,000 breeding humans left on the entire planet. This extreme pressure forced an unprecedented cognitive breakthrough. To survive in an environment where resources were completely wiped out, the isolated folders in the human brain had to crash into each other. Scientists call this cognitive fluidity. Suddenly, humans could take a concept from the social folder and apply it to the tool folder. This mental merger had a profound survival impact. A rock wasn't just a rock anymore. It could be carved to represent a spirit animal. A sound wasn't just an emotional cry anymore. It could become a symbol for an object that wasn't physically there. This was the true birth of the human voice, the day a sound became a symbol. Think about how powerful that shift really is. Before this moment, if an ancient human wanted to warn their tribe about a cave lion, they could only do it if the lion was actively visible, using an alarmed screech. But with symbolic language, a human could walk into a cave and say, "There was a lion by the river yesterday." This allowed our ancestors to do something no other creature on Earth had ever done. They could pass precise data through time. A grandmother could sit by a fire and teach her grandchildren how to survive a drought that happened 40 years prior. Information no longer died with the individual. It became immortal, stored in the collective memory of the tribe. If you are fascinated by how our ancestors survived these impossible odds, take a moment to drop a comment below. Do you think our ability to speak is what ultimately caused other human species, like the Neanderthals, to disappear? Let me know your thoughts. I read and reply to as many comments as I can. And if you haven't already, please give this video a like and share it. It really helps the channel tell these incredible stories to more people. But this incredible evolutionary leap leaves us with one final, haunting realization. For millions of years, nature kept our ancestors silent, protecting us from the literal danger of choking on our own words. When we finally broke that silence, we didn't just inherit a tool for survival, we inherited a weapon. Language allowed us to cooperate on a scale never before seen in the history of life on Earth. It allowed us to conquer the globe, build civilizations, and decode the secrets of the universe. But it also allowed us to deceive, to manipulate, and to organize warfare on a catastrophic scale. The human voice was invented in the dark, born out of an accidental shift in our throats and forged in the crucible of a frozen world. It is the very thing that makes us human. Every time you speak, you are using an ancient prehistoric technology, a tool won through millions of years of survival, danger, and evolutionary sacrifice. We are the apes that learned to speak, and in doing so, we changed the world.